And good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We are very excited for this. We've been looking forward to this for a long time. We have Miriam Feldman with us. We're thrilled that she's here to talk about her book called He Came In With It. And we are going to get started momentarily. Allow me to just share my screen. We have a quick PowerPoint presentation at the beginning. And then Miriam will take it from there, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. And just give me one moment. Okay, thank you all again so much for being with us this evening. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our discussion. First, I'd like to thank the sponsors of our webinar series, the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health, AbbVie, Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas, Otsuka, Neurocrine Biosciences, and Pharma. We want to thank them for their support for making this event possible. We have upcoming webinars sponsored by the same organizations that I just listed. Please join us for these webinars. We are making these webinars available because we feel that these topics that will be addressed are relevant to the mental health community in Texas. And we feel that people will benefit by learning about the different subjects that will be discussed. We'll be having a presentation on the criminal justice system next week. The following week, we'll have a webinar on tools that can be used for patient empowerment and innovative technologies that are available for individuals with mental health conditions. And then the final week in October, we'll have a presentation on self-advocacy within the college academic environment and the workplace. So please join us. And additional webinars will be announced for November and December. Please sign up for our newsletter at namitexas.org/newsletter for all the upcoming information about our webinars. If you have any questions during this presentation, please submit those in the Q&A box for the webinar, or you can also email me the questions at executive.director@namitexas.org. Miriam has graciously agreed to take questions submitted by webinar participants. This is a little bit about the book. These are just a couple of several quotes that have been stated about Miriam's book, He Came In With It, A Portrait of Motherhood and Madness. If you've sort of followed the mental health community, or you're part of the mental health community, you're likely familiar with these names. These are some of the most prominent voices on mental illness in America. So it's just great to see the praise that Miriam has gained for her book, and it seems clear that many mental health stakeholders have a lot to gain by exposing themselves to the information that's contained in this book. Here's the cover, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce Miriam, and then I'll turn it over to her. Miriam Feldman is an artist, writer, and mental health activist who splits her time between Los Angeles and her farm in rural Washington state. She has been married to her husband, Craig O'Rourke, also a successful artist, for 34 years, and they have 4 adult children. Their 33-year-old son, Nick, has schizophrenia. When Nick was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2004, Miriam became an activist and a writer. With firsthand knowledge of the woeful state of our mental health system, she decided to be an advocate for those who have no voice. She serves on the advisory board of Bring Change to Mind, Glenn Close's organization, and writes a monthly blog for the website Bring Change to Mind. Miriam is active in leadership at NAMI Washington, and her story is featured on the cover of their current national newsletter. She is a frequent guest on mental health podcasts and is active on Instagram, where she is building a community of family and loved ones dealing with mental illness. Miriam, thank you so much for being here. We're very excited to hear from you and to learn more about your book. So I will turn it over to you for your presentation, and then we're excited that you're willing to take some questions at the end. Thank you so much, Miriam.
Thank you, Greg. Happy to be here. Hello, everybody. I'm Miriam Feldman, and I'm going to start by reading you a small part from the book, just the beginning of the book. I guess there were signs. There had to have been signs. I missed them all. So where does this story begin? Damned if I know exactly. I had me a son. I had a fat little baby boy with a mouth like a rubber band. My husband Craig and I surfed the labor waves together like champs. When my son came out of me, the room was oddly hushed. He was my first, so I didn't know what to expect. But it sure was quiet in there. No slap and cry, no nothing. Nick was blue and cold when he was born. We waited in the delivery room for his inaugural wail and heard only silence. Don't worry, dear, the nurse said. We just have to warm him up a bit. They placed him in an apparatus that looked like a toaster oven. Everything in the room seemed cold, frozen. My husband and I each held our breath, and finally our son took his first. And we let ours go. I had my boy. Deep dark eyes and a serious composure. All the fingers, all the toes. We named him Samuel as we had planned, and then after a day or two, Craig and I renamed him Nicholas, Nick. I'd had a beloved uncle with that name, so that was fine with me. Craig gave him the middle name Dylan after Bob. Nick, a normal, healthy boy. He was strong. He was adorable. And his future was as bright as the goddamn sun. I would loll around and stare at that future of his like a baby myself, entranced with jangling keys. Now, Nick sits in a dark room all day, each day, and I wonder, what is he thinking? Who is in there? I see how people look at him. I can read my family's faces. I know that what has happened to him is a tragedy. But to me, he is in there, and his future is still ablaze, alone in his filthy apartment that I try to keep clean. So that's the very beginning of the book. And I'm happy to be talking to NAMI because NAMI pretty much saved my life. I have 4 kids, 4 adult kids, 3 daughters, and my son, Nick. And I spent the first 15 or 20 years of my parenting career worrying about car crashes, abductions, and cancer, none of which ever materialized. And then out of left field came schizophrenia, mental illness, something I had never even considered and really didn't know anything about. As I'm sure a lot of people here, since you're associated with NAMI, know, mental illness, especially serious mental illness, is like a gale force hurricane that just blows through your life, leaving anything not firmly nailed down just gone. You're left standing there with your whole world turned upside down and not understanding what happened or how it happened. And you really basically rebuild your whole life. If you were to make a list of red flags for serious mental illness and a list of normal teenage behavior, you'd have virtually the same list. all teenagers behave rather oddly. They're all irrational, impulsive, confused, all things that are symptoms of mental illness. So how was I supposed to know my son was developing schizophrenia? I thought he was just like all the other kids and he'd grow out of it, but he didn't. All the other kids were getting ready for college and planning for graduation, and Nick was having trouble just getting out of bed in the morning. So by the time he was getting towards the end of high school, I realized something was off, but I still never thought mental illness. Then eventually he had an incident where he cut his wrists. And at that point we knew, okay, this is something serious. And we sent him to drug rehab because we knew he was smoking pot, and therapy and different sort of treatment options. And it progressed from there. Initially, he was diagnosed with depression. After that, anxiety, then bipolar. And when he was 20, they told us it was schizophrenia. I, of course, blamed myself. I thought, I grew him, I brought him into this world. It has to be something that I did. And I would lie awake at night and go through a forensic audit of his entire life, trying to find the moment, that thing that happened that caused this, that I could have somehow avoided. While I was doing that, and Nick was slowly spiraling out of control, and our family was kind of falling apart, I went along for a long time pretending everything was fine. I'm kind of pathologically functional. No matter what happens, I get up, I put on my clothes, I brush my teeth, and I go out and meet the day. And it was a difficult time because things were falling apart and I was pretending everything was fine. And the thing that really saved me was my 9-year-old daughter. I used to, in the evenings, once everybody was settled down, I would go into the bathroom and lock the door and run the shower and cry, where I thought nobody could hear me, and I could still keep it a secret and pretend that I was on top of everything. And one evening I walked out right into my middle daughter, and she said to me, "Mom, why are you crying?" And I said, "I'm crying because I miss your son, my son." And she says, "What do you mean you miss Nick? Nick's not gone. Nick's still here." And I said, "Yeah, he is, but he's not who he was supposed to be." And she looked at me and said, "Yeah, he is. It's just not what you thought." I plopped down in the window seat as she marched nonchalantly off to her room, and I thought about that. And that became a real turning point for me. I realized that I had become so attached to the idea of what I thought Nick's life was going to look like that I wasn't dealing with what was happening right in front of me. And around the same time, somebody told me about NAMI and recommended that I go to the family to family course. And it was the perfect thing for me because I'm not much of a support group type person, but the idea of education really appealed to me. And anybody who's been involved with this family to family program knows what it is. It's a 12-week course where each week they give you a different aspect of the whole mental illness situation. You learn about the science and the medicine. You learn about the legal system. You learn how to navigate with the police. You learn about the different diseases. You learn about the brain chemistry, and they give you coping mechanisms. And like always in life, knowledge is power. And by the time I finished that course, I felt like I had some tools to deal with this. I mean, I really believe that the family to family saved me. And I think it saved Nick too, because I really wouldn't have known what to do. After my daughter said the thing to me about it not being what I had thought, it made me realize that I was wasting a lot of time and a lot of energy with denial and with fighting against what was happening instead of fighting for Nick and fighting to help him move forward in his life. It turned me around and pointed me in a better direction. So it was really bad for many years. The first few years of it were maybe 3 or 4 years. You know, I was just struggling to hold it together. I was running a business. I had 3 daughters, and Nick was just getting further and further out of control. Finally, at one point, 3 or 4 years into it, when Nick had become settled down and compliant with medication, he wasn't living any kind of a life. You know, he just sat in his apartment all day, but at least we weren't running around to hospitalizations and police arrests and things like that. And I started thinking about family to family, and I started thinking about NAMI programs and how it had helped me. And I got the idea to write the book. I decided that I needed to share this story. You know, one of the things that was most difficult in the beginning was I felt like I was the only person in the world who was experiencing this. This was 15 years ago. Nick's 35 now. It was even closer to 20 years ago. And people were beginning to talk about mental health. People were beginning to talk about stigma and things like this, but schizophrenia was not something that people talked about. So I didn't know anybody who was dealing with this. And I used to sit in my living room of my house and look out the window, and I felt like I was the only person in the whole world who was dealing with this. And I felt as though I had something ugly and frightening and dirty behind my front door, hidden in my house. And it was a horrible, lonely, frightening place to be. What I would have done to pick up a book like my book then and read that I wasn't the only one, and read with some sort of honesty and openness what this is like and what you go through and the mistakes that you make and how you pick up the pieces, it would have made all the difference to me. So that was when the seed was planted that I wanted to write this book. Now, I'm a painter. I've supported myself as an artist my whole life, not a writer, but this was a story that I felt was something I couldn't tackle in paint. And I wanted it to be something that was accessible to other people, where they could really read and see the details and see what we as a family went through. So I had the seed planted that I was going to write this book. And it wasn't until even several years later that I began and finally completed the book. But my hope with this book is that not it will be some sort of a roadmap or a guide, or certainly not I'm some example of the perfect way of dealing with this. More that I'm very honest and very open about my mistakes and my foibles and what my family went through, so that people will feel empowered to, first of all, accept themselves and accept their experience of this and know that they're not alone, but also talk about it. I think that it's so important that people tell their stories. This is something that we hide. You hide Granny up in the attic and you don't tell people something's wrong with her, or you have the weird uncle who comes to Christmas and sits in the corner. And, we need to talk about it. These people are our family, and these people are human beings that are part of the fabric of our society, and we've marginalized them to such a degree, especially people with serious mental illness, that they have no place in our society. We had the deinstitutionalization of the mental hospitals in the late 50s and the 60s that was supposed to be replaced by community-based centers and was never followed through on, so that never happened. And then what we've got today in 2020 is that the de facto mental health facilities are the prisons. And if you're not in the prisons, you're usually relegated to homelessness, to the streets. And that's appalling. I mean, that's an epic failure of our culture, an epic failure of our society. I look at my son, and to me, this is my son. This is the person I brought into this world, and he has the same right to a place in our world as everybody else. And I see, I used to drive down the street and see the guy on the corner talking to himself, or, screaming at somebody who's not there. And I would cringe, and it would make me feel terrible. And now that guy is my son. And I would look at that guy and I would think, where's his mother? Where's his family? Where's somebody who cares about him? But now I understand that the system is so difficult to navigate, so impossible to get care, that so many families just have no choice but to give up, because they have no tools to work with. They have there isn't help. There's such a gap between what is available and what it costs and what people can afford, that I think that a lot of families just end up having to throw their hands up in the air. I'm I'm middle class and, privileged person. I'm white. I have an education. I have resources. This almost took me down. And I'm also a pit bull. I mean, I don't give up. With all those things going for me, I almost lost him. I mean, it was almost more than I could do. And I think about people with less resources, less knowledge, and it explains all the people you see on the streets, all these lost souls. And the thing is this: we as a society are not doing them a favor by creating a place for them. They have a right to a place. They're human beings on this earth too. And it is immoral that we don't provide for, care for, and take care of these people. So somewhere between the point where I decided I was going to write a book, and I actually wrote the book, I became an advocate, because I just couldn't in good conscience sit by anymore and not get involved. So I got involved with Bring Change to Mind, which is Glenn Close's nonprofit. I'm also involved with NAMI. But I'd like to talk to you guys about something that I've been thinking about just in the last year or two that I think is an important component to this. We as a culture there's millions of dollars spent every year on information campaigns now about mental health and fighting stigma, which is good and it's important. And I know that NAMI does a lot of that, and I support it. But there seems to be a inverse ratio happening in terms of the factions of mental illness that are the least serious are getting the most money. And then serious mental illness, which is so dire and people need so much help, gets the least money. We need to allocate funds for research and also for hospital beds and facilities for people with serious mental illness. There needs to be some kind of a readjusting. And so I've been working with SARDA, which is the Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Association of America, and they've been working on a lot of that. And I think that that's important. So that's something else that I'm doing. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about is the way that a mental health crisis affects the whole family. It doesn't just happen to the person who's getting it. And one of my deepest regrets is that my 3 daughters ended up really marginalized. When one kid's on fire, you put all your attention into putting out that fire. And especially my youngest daughter really got kind of lost in the shuffle. And there was a lot of collateral damage. And all 3 of my daughters they're doing great now, and they're all adults and they have good lives. but they still deal with this. There's trauma, there's post-traumatic stress syndrome, I think, from this. And I think that we need to open up and pay regard to the other members of the family, especially the siblings. If I had it to do all over again, I think what I would have done is allocate each daughter with sort of a surrogate mom, a friend or an aunt or somebody like that to pick up the slack, because it really is impossible to hold it all together all by yourself. And I think that would have helped them a lot too. So that sibling fallout is something that's really important. And back to the idea of telling our stories, I think there's a lot of reasons why that's important. I have an experience that I go through over and over again, because one of the things that I decided is that not only I was going to talk about it in the book, but I'm going to talk about it in real life. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to call it something it isn't. I'm not going to not say schizophrenia because it scares people. And so I have experiences where recently I was on the telephone with the bank because Nick's SSDI check had not been deposited in time and his rent check had bounced. And so I was trying to explain to get them to take the charges off. And I said to the woman, I said, my son has schizophrenia, and I explained the situation. And she's very nice and she took care of it. And then at the end of the conversation, right before we would normally hang up, she said to me quietly, I'm dealing with this in my life also. And there's just that little moment where it's like the secret handshake or something. And I said to her, oh, really? Who is that? And, the next thing you know, we were on the phone for 15 more minutes talking about her situation with her father, who also has schizophrenia. And this happens to me at the bank. This happens to me in the market. This happens to me on the phone. People are literally dying to talk about this. We're holding this in, we're ashamed of it, or we're afraid of scaring people away. And we have to talk about it. We have to bring it into the conversation, into the dialogue, so it becomes a part of our world. 1% of the people get schizophrenia, and that's just schizophrenia. That's a lot of people to just sort of shove into the margins and not talk about. So I think that talking about it is super important. And my daughters have gotten to the point where they're warriors for mental health, and they go out and they talk about it and they share with people. And when they see somebody on the street who's suffering or has a problem, they step up and they get involved. And I think that we are going to be able to affect some real change, especially now in 2020, where things have gotten so dire and so bad on so many fronts. There's an intersectionality where all these issues that are in the forefront right now meet. People talking about the police force and the horrible things that happen to people sometimes when police force is mishandled. Well, that certainly intersects with mental health. Every single time I've had to call the police, in the back of my mind, I'm afraid he's going to end up dead because they're not going to understand and they're not going to know what to do. So there's an intersection there. There's an intersection with Black Lives Matter and people who, brown and Black people who don't get the same kind of healthcare, who don't get the same kind of framework for this, that it's not in their culture to deal with it. And so I think that there's a way that we can put all these issues on the table and start to deal with them and start to share them and help each other. I've created kind of a network of mothers all over the country through my Instagram and my Facebook, where we've all got each other's back now and we talk about it, and there's nothing that's off the table and there's nothing that can't be shared or can't be talked about. And I think it eases the pain of people who are going through this. And it also creates a situation where we're all able to help each other and create a whole new community. So that's my basic overall talk. If anybody has any questions or anything, I'd love to open it up to people talking about their situations, or if you have any questions, anything like that.
Yes, thank you so much, Miriam. That was incredibly powerful and insightful. Several questions have come in, and I'd like to share a few of those with you. Someone said, my son is 30. I read your book and I could have written the same one. I am very angry at the system, especially in Texas. How do you deal with your own feelings when you hit all the barriers in getting care for your son? And also the questioner asked, what meds is he on today? And does he participate in group?
Okay, that's a lot. First, I'll talk about the first part of the question, because that was a big part of the book, and I was trying to leave time for questions, so I didn't go into that talking, but it's great that she asked it. It's really hard. I mean, there's a lot of anger, and the frustration level is incredible. I mean, trying to, throw yourself up against this machine is hard. For me, what happened was, somewhere in the first few years, I've always liked to exercise, and I, go to the gym and all that. And suddenly I couldn't do those things anymore because it just wasn't a place for it. And there was a yoga center right near our house. So I thought, okay, I'll go to yoga. I can get exercise at least at yoga. Yoga was something that's never appealed to me. Like I said, I'm kind of type A personality. I kind of grab life by the horns. And to me, yoga seemed very passive and a little bit woo-woo. And I went, and it's all in the book, all the details of it. But the long and the short of it is, what ended up happening is, I went in, and initially the first few months, in the back of my mind, I just had sort of a comedy routine going in my head, making fun of everything. And then eventually it started seeping in. And what I got from yoga, and I don't think it's something that you can only find in yoga, but boy, this really saved me. What I got was the idea of acceptance, and bringing that into the way that you live your life. From the minute we're born, from the minute we know we're pregnant, we're in love with these children. We're in love with the child. We're in love with their future. We're in love with everything that we can imagine it's going to be. And then you have this child, and then something drastic happens like this, and nothing is the way you think it's going to be. Letting go of that is hard. So you waste all this energy with this resistance to what it was. And then this goes back to what my daughter said about, it wasn't what you thought. Once I accepted that this was my son, this was the person that I brought into the world, not my idea of what it was going to be, but Nick right here in front of me, I was able to move forward. And don't get me wrong, I'm not that woo-woo. I still have my moments of howling at the moon, and my points of incredible grief that I think that I can never crawl back out of. But what I learned from yoga is that acceptance is strength. I always regarded acceptance, to me, was a synonym for surrender, which meant losing, waving the white flag and losing the war. And now I realize that surrender is a sign of intelligence. When you can't win in terms of changing something, how stupid to not just accept it and move forward with it. So for me, it became a really simple choice. And that's a hard thing to come to, and it's hard to let go of your dreams and your aspirations. And, I see Nick's friends, he's 35 now. I see them married, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're musicians, they have families. And it's very hard not to feel jealous. It's very hard not to mourn what your child is not going to have. But I just keep reminding myself, it serves no purpose. It just serves no purpose. So I let myself do it sometimes, but not a lot, because really it just makes me feel worse. Now, what was the second part of the, what is he on now? This is
Yeah.
very interesting. Nick was compliant and stable on meds for a long time, for more than 10 years. And we've had our ups and downs, and we've had our hospitalizations, and we have had our times where he's done really genius things, like decided to eat a bunch of edible marijuana and go into psychosis and then spend weeks in the hospital. So we've had our ups and downs, but he's been pretty stable. But quite recently, we've changed him. He's in the process right now to switching over to clozapine. And I don't want to bore everybody with my big, long clozapine talk, but if anybody's interested, please contact me directly and I'll be happy to give you the information, because what I'm finding is it's really a game changer. I was first told about clozapine when I met Ellen Sachs, who's a law professor at UCLA, and she wrote the book, The Center Cannot Hold, and she's one of the foremost people in the mental health world and advocacy. And she asked me what Nick was on, and then she said to me, Mimi, you really should try clozapine. And this was right after he had been hospitalized, and I waited a couple more years because I just couldn't bear the idea of going through a change. But we are a good way through it, and I'm seeing changes I didn't think I would ever see.
Thank you so much. There's a question that came in asking, well, at first it says, thank you for being so sincere, Miriam, and sharing your life with us. My daughter was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder at 28 years old. It began with delusions. She still believes those delusions are real, so I just go along with it to not create chaos and distrust from her. Am I doing the right thing?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm just a mom. I'm not a doctor, so there's a disclaimer there. I don't want to give medical advice to anybody. What I would say to you is, from what I've read and from what I know, that is the basic good approach. They say that when you constantly try and make them see that their delusions aren't real, that's not a good approach. Now, what I can recommend is there's a book by oh God, I can't think of his last name, but his first name, but his last name is Almodovar. You know the book? Maybe you can put it up. It's called "I'm Not Crazy, I Don't Need Help."
Yeah, and focusing on anosognosia.
It focuses on anosognosia, and it really gives you. He's great, and he has got. I mean, he lectures all over the place, and he's a good friend of the doctor who's treating Nick, and he gives you, he does give you a roadmap for how to deal with this, how to deal with somebody who has anosognosia, how to help them without reinforcing the delusions in a bad way. So I would highly recommend that book.
There's a question that came up about your perspective on the primary care system. The questioner said, so great to hear you speak. Do you feel you got appropriate primary care for your son as he grew? Was holistic care missing with integrated mental health processes? And the questioner says, it was missing with my son, who was missed as he grew sicker at 16 and ultimately succumbed to suicide at 20 years old. I am a pediatrician who couldn't be his doctor, but was his father, who couldn't get the medical system to see him as he was either.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Nick did get good primary medical care his whole life. Again, like I refer to my forensic explorations into every minute of his life, I have identified things that I wish I had seen, I wish I had realized, but I really had no framework to know that. So it wasn't like I tried to get him help and people wouldn't listen. I mean, Nick was an extraordinary kid. I mean, he was smart and funny and handsome and incredibly talented and had lots of friends. So I had no reason to think anything was wrong. Now, as he became a teenager, like I referenced, they all act crazy when they're teenagers. So it's hard to identify. So when I finally started realizing something was wrong, then I started to seek help within the mental health world. So, but what I have now, we live in a small town up here in Washington, and the mental health structure framework here isn't great. And up here, we have an amazing primary care physician who is really at the helm of taking care of Nick and taking care of his mental and physical health. But I think that if we had, if they did some modicum of basic mental health screening as a kid is growing up, and maybe could identify markers or identify problems, that would have been helpful. Because I just, like I said, I just really didn't think about mental health. When Nick was about 15, he had broken up with a girlfriend, and I was walking down the hall, and he was lying in his bed with his face to the wall. So I went in to try and cheer him up. And he told me how bad he feels, and I told him not to worry about it. There were going to be so many other girls, and this would be just a blip on the radar, perfect mom answer. And then he turned and he looked at me and he said, "Mom, I'm afraid of my own thoughts. I have really bad thoughts." And I gave what I thought was perfect mom answer. Again, don't worry about your thoughts. Thoughts aren't what matter. What matters is what you do. Perfect thing to tell a person developing a thought disorder. But how was I supposed to know? I look back on that now and I realize he was telling me he was hearing voices, but I had no way to even recognize it, and I actually trivialized it. So, maybe some sort of basic training or basic information, a pamphlet, to the parents saying, this could be a marker. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, and it brings to mind, in part because you live in Washington State, the University of Washington has been really at the forefront of research on how we can meaningfully integrate mental health services into the primary care system, utilizing the collaborative care model. There's a place at the University of Washington, I believe, called the AIMS Center, and they're doing some really incredible research that I think, if it's implemented, it will help a lot of people. And there was a recent study that came out here in Texas by the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute that found that if there were universal access to the collaborative care model in the primary care system, it would save hundreds of lives every year. So that's something we really need to look at when we think about potential changes to the mental health system. I think involving the primary care system is high on the list. And actually, I'd like to get your perspective on that, Miriam. Obviously, there are a lot of deficiencies in the mental health system, and it's hard to figure out what we should focus on or where our resources should be directed. You talked a little bit about how we should have dedicated funding, or we should rebalance the resources more towards serious mental illness. And I'm wondering if you could change one thing about the mental health system. Of course, you may not be familiar with the mental health system here in Texas, but if you could change one thing about how you see mental health systems working across America, generally speaking, what would you focus on first?
Well, first and foremost, there need to be more beds. There needs to be access and availability of good inpatient treatment. That's the biggest thing. I went through years with Nick where I would spend hours and hours on the internet. I still do it on the internet, looking for somewhere to send him where he's going to be okay. And I find places like Gould Farm, which is in upstate New York. There is a place. Oh no, that's not Texas, but and these amazing places that integrate everything and have great care. And then you get down to the bottom and they don't take any kind of insurance, and they cost $40,000 a month. So, and you're looking at somebody with schizophrenia, it could be years, it could be their life. So there's virtually no inpatient treatment that is accessible to a normal human being. So that is the big glaring thing. That is my issue, because my son happens to have serious mental illness. On the other hand, I think another very important component that we need to address is the HIPAA laws and the dissemination and sharing of information, because since I've been an advocate and I talk to people all over the country, one horror story after another that is resulting from doctors, clinicians, and hospital workers not being able to share information with the loved ones. If it has to be something that has to change. There has to be some sort of caveat. If somebody is not cognitively able to recognize and know that they're sick, you have to, if somebody's drunk, they don't release them out of the hospital until they're sober, or they release them into the custody of somebody else. Well, it's a similar sort of mental impairment when you have mental illness, and yet they don't cooperate with it. And not only that, there's also, they're losing out on a plethora of information that we as parents and loved ones could be giving them. I recently did a talk to the entire psychiatric department at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York last month. And it was a mother's perspective on schizophrenia. And that was one of the major things that I was talking about, is trying to make them see, use us, utilize what we've got. We're the ones who monitor their symptoms. We're the ones who know what they're going through. You're losing all this information that you could use, all this data that would be helpful in treating them, because you don't listen to us. So to me, those are the two things.
Thank you for that answer. I agree with you very strongly that those are two of absolutely the most important deficiencies that need to be addressed in the mental health system. And those are both issues that that are very, very much characterize the mental health system here in Texas. And we're working through our advocacy to address those issues. I think we got a question in from someone who has read your book, and they say you mention in the book that 25% of people with schizophrenia recover after 10 years. If a person gets access to the right care at the right time, do you believe that recovery is likely? And what is the right care, or what are the elements of care that have proven to be most effective for people with schizophrenia?
Okay. That statistic I took from Surviving Schizophrenia, the book by Torrey Fuller, Dr. Fuller. And, as much as I know about this now, I find that a very confusing statistic. I don't see much recovery from schizophrenia. I think that maybe that 25% encompasses people who have had psychotic breaks and it's been identified called schizophrenia and they've moved past it. But I mean, there are people who it does run its course in 10 years. In terms of what makes the difference, I think that early intervention, is the biggest thing. If they can get in and identify it and get them medicated, because, according to Dr. Robert Laitman, who's Nick's doctor in New York, who is overseeing his clozapine, Dr. Laitman explained to me recently that, it's degenerative. So that as you get sicker and sicker, parts of your brain, your brain is not advancing and growing. So the sooner that they can get in there and medicate them and get them out of psychosis, the better the prognosis is for the future. One of the things that is agonizing for me right now is to see Nick at 35 improving in ways that I never imagined. And now I just keep thinking, why did I know about this 10, 15 years ago? But I think that early intervention, to answer the question, early intervention makes a big difference. And something else, another component to this, and this is the whole integrative care and whole holistic approach, is that nutrition and that sort of health and exercise and your overall physical health is very important. And there's a lot of things that you can do nutritionally that can make a big difference in terms of the outcome, and supplements and things like that. And also, to keep them, to keep them stable on the medication and keep them away from harmful things, alcohol, other drugs, cigarettes. Virtually everybody with schizophrenia smokes because it hits some receptor in the brain that they like and that helps them. And one of the hardest things is we've had to Nick's quit smoking since he's been on the clozapine because the nicotine or the smoke impairs the absorption of the clozapine. But, like anything else in life, I think an overall healthy lifestyle is a large component.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. You mentioned that families often make mistakes when they're trying to navigate the situation of having a loved one with a serious mental illness. What are some of the biggest mistakes to avoid, and how can we avoid those mistakes?
Well, if you read the book, you will get a Three Stooges worthy depiction of me navigating schizophrenia with my son. There's just like so many things that I did wrong, and I wanted to be honest about it in the book because it's important that people know that we screw up. But I think that one of my biggest mistakes was hiding. For the first few years, I was like scurrying around with a dustpan and a brush and just trying to clean it all up behind him and hide it. And it just was a waste of energy, and it deferred treatment, and it deferred the help that we needed. And hiding and pretending it's not real and denial is a big mistake. It's just like buck up, face it, and move forward from there, because your loved one is the one who's going to suffer if you don't admit it to yourself. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but I'm saying it in the same way I'm saying it to myself. That's what I wish I had done. I wasted time. So I think that's a big mistake. And I think that coming from that is also the mistake of, not being honest with clinicians and doctors and just, trying to somehow paint a rosier picture than it is. Just get over it. Just be honest. Just tell the truth, because everything you cover up or fudge or try and make look better than it is just denies and defers treatment for your loved one. So I think that's a big one. And then, that's the biggest one that I would say as a mistake, that I would say to other people. If you read the book, you have an endless display of all the little mistakes that I made. But I would say that's important. And then, not in the under the heading of a mistake, but something that I would really advise that everybody do is just educate yourself. Read every book and learn as much as you can, because that makes a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's been some really powerful writing about mental health. It seems like, especially over the last couple of years, there's been, every year there's 2-3 books that really take off on mental health. One of the ones that I've been hearing a lot about is Hidden Valley Road, I believe is the name. Are you familiar with that book, Miriam?
Yeah, actually, when that book came out I guess it was last January, when I read about it, the first thing, and Oprah picked it for her book club, the first thing I thought was, great. Now Oprah's not going to pick my book. But then once I got over that, I thought, well, I want to talk to this guy. So I found his information and I reached out to him, and we're friends now. And it's a profoundly impactful book. And I mean, it's an extreme story. This is a family with 12 kids, and I think 6 or 8 of them got schizophrenia. But Bob is a great guy, and we put together a panel. We did a Zoom panel a few months ago with Bob and me and 2 other mothers of people with schizophrenia, and talked about the comparison of mid-century. It was like the 50s and 60s, this story happened, and what it's like now. And it was a very interesting panel. If anyone's interested, it's up on YouTube. It's Robert Kolker and me doing this. And yeah, that was an important book. And I think he did a great job of just really giving, he's investigative journalist, and so he just came at it from all angles.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the fact that we're seeing more writing about mental health is a good sign, and it means it's coming out of the shadows, especially seeing more family members writing about their experiences, like yourself, more individuals. I think things are heading in the right direction when it comes to simply mental illness slowly but surely becoming less stigmatized. And
I agree.
we're gleaning insights from families and individuals about what works and what the deficiencies are in the system that needs to be addressed. So that's encouraging. There are a few more questions. I hope we have time to speak on. Someone,
Can I just say one more thing about the book
please,
that
absolutely, yeah, thank
is,
you.
one thing about like Bob's book, and there's everyone has a different angle, a different facet of it. His book is so great, and then there are books like Pete Early's book, Crazy, is so good. It really, investigates the system and all of that. And my book, I don't concentrate. It's certainly an element. How would it not be? But I don't concentrate as much on the system and how to fix it and what needs to be done, as just it's my story. And I get letters from, it's a family story, and I get letters every day from families all over the country, all over the world even, saying, oh my God, this is like I'm reading my own story. I haven't read anything like this before. And I've been so challenged that this book had to come out in the middle of COVID, when every bookstore, library, and college in America is closed. But that's why I'm fighting so hard to get it out there, because it's really resonating. And I want people to know that this isn't a big sob fest. This book is funny and heartwarming, because that's what our life is. This is not something that ruined my life. I would, without a doubt, give anything I have for Nick not to have gotten schizophrenia. But ours is not a sad story. It's a tough story, and we went through a lot, but we're a strong family that loves fiercely, and this is not the end of the world. Nick's our son. He's part of our life. His sisters adore him. His nieces and nephews adore him. And I want to put something out there in the world that shows you it's not the end of your life. There's a way to incorporate this into your life and still have a good life and have a laugh and have joy and have all those things. I decided that this was not going to turn me into somebody who didn't have joy in my life. And that's the thing that I want this book to do in the world, is to show that there's a way to reconfigure and have a life with this.
That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And there are a couple people asking about tools that family members can use. Like, what is your take on like guardianships, conservatorships, medical power of attorney? Were those options that your family explored?
Yeah, we did explore them. It was they're hard to do, and it's different in every state, of course. But we were lucky. I managed to be able to keep Nick on the right track with a combination of bribery and rewards. So that we ended up not having to do conservatorship. Now, we had to look into it at a couple points, but it's hard to get. And so it wasn't something that we were able to or ended up needing to do. But yes, it's a great tool. And certainly when you're dealing with, really entrenched anosognosia and inability to understand what's going on, you have to protect your loved one. So I agree with that. We have a special needs trust set up for Nick, so that once we're gone, there's a framework in place to take care of him. And that's an important thing. I mean, I really advise everybody, talk to a lawyer, or again, get a book that talks about this, because there's a lot of information out there. Each situation is different, but I think that everything that you can do to protect your loved one and reduce your level of stress and fear and panic is important.
And you mentioned he is on disability. Was he open to that when the idea first came forward, or did it take some convincing? So there's someone who is sharing that their family member is not willing to let them help with the disability process.
Yeah.
How did that work for your family?
Well, the point at which Nick got on disability, he was so psychotic. I mean, he didn't know what was going on. We just took control of it and we got him on it. And, you know, there's a whole process. You have to apply, you have to go see a doctor. And yeah, it's all in the book, that whole story. But so at that point, it wasn't something that we had to convince him to do. We just did it. And and, you know, it was a hard thing for us initially because somebody suggested we do it. And my husband and I sat down and we went, well, we're not those people. You know, we're not people who go on the dole. You know, we take care of our own. But then I realized that we're not scamming the system by putting our son on disability. He's disabled. I've paid into the system my whole life. That's what it's there for. And now I think, thank God I did that. You know, it would have bankrupted us just paying for the medication. So I think that I would advise anybody who is able to get their loved one or convince their loved one to get on disability and get the medical coverage to do it, because this is a huge undertaking. As far as how to convince somebody who doesn't want to do it, I don't know. I would just refer them back to Almodovar's book, you know, the I'm Not Crazy book, because there's a lot of stuff in there about how to reason with somebody.
Thank you so much. And do you have time for just one more question before we wrap up? A question came in a couple minutes ago asking, does Nick have anosognosia at this point? And what improvements have you seen in him now that he's on clozapine?
You know, he doesn't have anosognosia now. We had moved him, he had moved out of that years ago, in that he wouldn't really discuss schizophrenia or anything like that, but we could say the word schizophrenia, and he, you know, I mean, he acknowledged it, and he had his roundabout way of dealing with it. Since he's been on the clozapine, it's just a huge turnaround, and he's reasoning and his mind is working in a way that I haven't seen it work since before he got sick. And now he'll talk about it, and we talk about it. And I say to him, you know, we just had a thing recently where he wanted to smoke pot again. I mean, it's just these things come up. And I said to him, you know, Nick, you're doing so well, and you've got this schizophrenia, and you know, this medication is really helping you, and everybody's working so hard for you to regain your life. And when I said that, he stopped and he said, yeah, I really want that, Mom. I really want that. And so he's looking at and seeing his life, and he's understanding that he has schizophrenia and that he can make choices about what his future is going to be. And that's a huge change.
Thank you so much, Miriam. This was an incredible evening. I think a lot of people got a lot out of it. Just a lot of people in the chat and in the Q&A saying this was powerful. And it's just amazing how many people feel like they can relate to what you shared. This is something that affects a lot more families than I think even we as mental health advocates realize. So, you know, your book is incredible. It's powerful. And I think it is helping a lot of people. And the more people who hear about it, the more people it's going to help. And that's why we wanted to have this event this evening. So thank you so much for your time. And I hope everyone, yes,
you know,
absolutely.
I just want to say to the audience, I guess, I'm really accessible. You know, I have my website. It's miriam-feldman.com, and everything's up there if you're interested, if you want to see about the book, or I got Nick's artwork up there and everything, and my email's there. if somebody has a question or wants to commiserate or just reach out, because it's my whole thing is I'm not changing the world through, changing laws, but I'm trying to just one-on-one. So I'm here, and tell people about the book if you know somebody who you think it might be helpful to.
And is the website the best place to purchase the book from? They could just follow the link from there.
Links on there for that. Everything's on there. There's a blog. Everything's there. So Miriam-Feldman.com. Everything's there.
Excellent. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. You will see an evaluation form that should pop up on your screen right after we end the webinar. And it also should arrive in your email inbox as well. If you would, please fill out the evaluation form so that we can get some feedback on how this went and make adjustments for the next one. And speaking of which, the next one is coming up just around the corner on Wednesday of next week at 1 p.m. We will be learning about the criminal justice system in Bexar County, San Antonio, and picking up some insights on things that have worked well there. So we hope to see you there. Please register at namitexas.org/webinars. Thank you again to our sponsors, to Miriam, and to everyone who attended this evening. Anything you need from us, just feel free to reach out anytime. You are not alone. Thank you and have a great evening.